Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be going through Genesis chapter 19 of the book of Genesis. Real quick, I want to start off by just mentioning again that I started a Discord server. That way, if anybody was looking to comment on anything and they weren't live, they could just comment it on the Discord server and kind of have some communication that way. If you go to the About page on my Twitch page, you'll see the link to the Discord server. Tonight, again, chapter 19, the book of Genesis. Just a real quick recap last chapter. Chapter 18, we saw Abraham. We saw God reminding Abraham that his covenant, his promises to him, that he'd have a son with Sarah, who would turn out to be Isaac. So God's reminding Abraham of this, and also God let Abraham know about Sodom and Gomorrah and what his plans for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah basically were, and Abraham basically pleads for Sodom and Gomorrah. And when we last left Abraham and God, Abraham basically was pleading that if there's 10 righteous men in the city, then God will save the city. So now we're going to move on to chapter 19, and then we're going to see basically the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But first, let's have a quick prayer. Lord, just thank you for this week, Lord. Thank you for your blessings in our lives, Lord. Thank you for all you're doing and just these wonders that you've done for us, Lord. Help this Bible study to just dive into your word, make it applicable to our lives and our hearts tonight, Lord. In your name, amen. Sorry, I just forgot to do one thing. Sorry about that. How to change the stream title. So chapter 19, we'll start in verse 1. We'll first read and then we'll go to verse 1. Now 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face towards the ground. And he said, "Hear now, my lords, please turn in your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly, so they turned to him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them carnally." So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind them, and said, "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See, now I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason that they have come under the shadow of my roof." And they said, "Stand back." Then they said, The one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot in with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, a son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city? Take them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his son-in-laws who had married his daughters and said, "Get up, get out of this place, and the Lord will destroy this city." But his son-in-laws he seemed to be joking. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry and said, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, and the Lord being merciful to them, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, that he said, "Escape for your life, do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain, escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed." Then Lot said to them, "Please no, my lords. Indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy which you have shown me by saving my life, but I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. It is not a little one, and my soul shall live." And he said to him, "See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, and that I will not overthrow the city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. And the sun had risen above the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all of the plain, all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. But his life looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and saw, and behold, the smoke of the land which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his 2 daughters dwelt in the cave. Now the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man on earth to come in to us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and their firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, Indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight, and you go in and lie with him, that he may preserve the lineage of our father. Then they made our father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son named Moab. He is the father of Moabites to this day. And the younger, who also bore a son, named his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. So that is chapter 19 of the book of Genesis. It's not obviously the most, it's an interesting story. It's not the most, I don't know. It's a hard story to read, basically. That's the best way I could put it. So we'll start in verse 1, though. And there came 2 angels to Sodom at evening. Now, if you remember last chapter, when Abraham had this interaction, there were 3 people in this interaction. We know that one of them was Jesus, and then there were 2 angels. So at this point, Jesus leaves, and now it's the 2 angels that are going into Sodom. Now, the 2 angels are basically going to Sodom to see this city. Now, angels aren't omniscient, so they don't know everything. So the angels are going in to see for themselves this city. So they're heading to the city, and they're going to meet Lot by the gate of Sodom. Now, John Corson says this, and real quick, I'm going to pull up this slide. I'm going to show this slide real quick, and now this is the slide for the basically what it looks like in a city gate. The city gates were designed so that you could have commerce right basically outside the city, basically where traders would be coming into your city. You could have commerce there, you could have defensive structures there, and then you could have your traders and government all going on. So this means Lot was Lot had a pretty important piece of this city, right, in Sodom. So it's not like Lot was just a regular fellow camping outside the city. Lot is present in this gate of the city. John Corson writes, like every other city gate in biblical times, the gate in which Lot sat at was a large area of the entrance of the city where the city leaders would give advice and render civic decisions. The fact that Lot had sat at Sodom's gate indicates he had become a leader of Sodom. How had he arrived at this point? In Genesis 13:10, he looked at Sodom. 2 verses later, he pitched his tent towards Sodom. In chapter 14, he moved into Sodom. In other words, he arrived there one step at a time. So we talked about that a little the last chapter was basically Lot basically was inching closer and closer to Sodom, which was a really sinful city. And we talked about how people do the same thing. You inch closer and closer to sin. It's not like people just dive in head first. You just inch closer and closer, and that's what Lot did with Sodom. Verse 1 and 2. So Lot sees these 2 visitors. At this point, we don't believe Lot knows that they're angels. But Lot sees them. He bows down. He brings them in. And then he tells them, stay at my house. And the angels try to turn him down in order to go through the city of Sodom. But then Lot basically is like, no, don't go through the city of Sodom. He's worried about these visitors going to the city of Sodom. He basically knows what's going to happen when they go into the city of Sodom, which we're going to see in verse 4. Now, the angels listen to Lot, and then they come into Lot's house. And now I'll read 4 and 5. But before they laid down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house with both old and young. all the people from every quarter, and they called unto Lot and said, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out to us that we may know them. So every quarter, so every part of the city basically came out, both young and old, and they basically want to know or have sexual relations with these visitors. So this is basically, the Bible is literally saying that it was basically the entire city of these men are basically wanting to rape these visitors to the city. So if you can imagine how sinful this city was. I mean, this is, can you imagine a city where you, say as a tourist, go down to a city and you're like, oh, this looks like a good hotel, and then all the men of the city gather around the entire city and they want to rape you. So it's pretty sinful city, as we say. Going down to verse 6 and 7. So now the men are trying to get in. So Lot went through, shut the door behind him, and then said, Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. So it's kind of concerning that Lot is calling these people his brethren, and there's people trying to rape two people staying at his house, and he's calling them brethren. So, if you were to come to my house and people were trying to break in to have, to rape you, and I was like, hey, buddies, don't do this to my friends, you'd be like, what kind of people do you hang out with? Like, where's your moral guidance here? What are you doing here? Now, Lot, it's like Lot just digs his grave a little deeper, but Lot in verse 8 says, See, now I have two daughters who have not known a man. So he has two daughters who are virgins and haven't had sex before. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do with them as you wish, only do nothing to these men. So here we have Lot trying to trade his daughters to save his visitors in his household. John Corson does a pretty good job of writing this. He says, This story is so unbelievably sordid and shocking that I've researched it thoroughly and carefully in order to find a cultural or a historical explanation for a dad who would offer his daughters in this way, but there is none to be found, other than the fact that Lot was completely desensitized to what was happening. He had been in Sodom for so long that he had become accustomed to perversion, just as we have. Things that were once shocked and scandalized our community are now acceptable. For like Lot, we are a nation that has been seduced, and we have lost moral compass. So there's no historical precedent for this, trading your two daughters for your guests or whatever the case may be. This is just Lot basically having just decisions, these sinful decisions, and not even thinking about morality or anything like that. So now at this point, the angels are gonna blind. They're trying to break in. The angels blind them basically, and they still try to break in even after. So they struck the men at the door with blindness, and they became weary trying to find the door. So they're blind, and they're still trying to find the door to get in to rape these visitors. So this is just another level that it's pushing it to. So now the angels are basically telling Lot, you're going to get out of here. You have to get out of here. And the men said to Lot, Hast thou anyone besides these son-in-laws, thy sons, thy daughters, and whatsoever thou in the city, bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place. So they give Lot this warning. Now again, we said the angels don't know everything, right? So the angels are truly asking, who do you have family-wise in this city? Because we don't know, right? The angels don't know everything. They don't know your thoughts. They don't know your heart. God does. Jesus does, but not the angels. So they're literally trying to find out as you're basically, they're asking because they truly need to know. David Guzik writes this, that basically, why did Lot's son-in-laws not listen to him? Because when he moved his family to Sodom and became a leader of the community, Lot lost his credibility, and the same is true. A dad loses credibility when his kids see glaring inconsistencies between his words and his walk. Poor Lot, his peers told him to stand back, and his family simply scoffed. So, here the son-in-laws basically are laughing at Lot, basically being like, we're not going to leave this city. This is our home. This is our city. So Lot really doesn't have any kind of patriarchy or any kind of, respect by his family. Spurgeon says this: "Let me bid every Christian man to look around him among his kith and kin to see which of them remain unconverted. Let your prayers go up for them, son-in-law, thy sons and thy daughters." And I think that's really pressing to our hearts, right? We look at Lot, and we look at his situation that he's in right now, and he's in a really tough situation where his family basically is just laughing at him instead of getting out of the city where it's going to be destroyed. And it's kind of our own hearts with our own families to reach out to them and make sure they're not going to perish, basically. Verse 15, we'll go down to 15. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And while he lingered, John Corson writes, "If angels came to you and said, 'Get out of here as fast as you can,' what would you do?" The only reason I could think of for Lot's lingering is that he was hoping against hope that his daughters and his son-in-laws would show up. So there's Lot basically being like, I'm going to wait as long as possible that they show up. Now, I contrast this to Abraham. Now, Abraham, when he was directed by God to circumcise his family, woke up early in the morning to do it. When Abraham was directed by God to sacrifice Isaac, which we'll get to later in Genesis, he woke up early in the morning to do it. So we see Abraham basically starting out early in the morning to do what God's asking of him. But then we have Lot, who's basically lingering as long as possible to, I wouldn't say avoid doing God's work, but basically hoping against hope that he doesn't have to do it. John Wesley writes this: "Though Lot did not make a jest of the warnings as his son-in-laws, yet he lingered. He did not so much haste as the case required, and it might have been fatal to him if the angels had not laid hold of his hand and brought him forth. Herein the Lord was merciful to him. Otherwise he might justly have left him to perish, since he was loath to depart. If God not had been merciful to us, our lingering might have been our ruin." And I think that's really interesting that we may judge Lot. As Christians, we may look at Lot and be like, if God tells you to go, you got to go. But then I look at so many situations in my own life and people I've known lives, and it's like we've all kind of lingered in different parts of our life, and we're like, well, I don't need to go to church. I don't need this. I don't need to get serious about God. God's calling me to this, and I'm just going to take my time doing it. Thank God that we have a merciful, patient God full of grace, because like Lot needed it, we needed it as well. Now, Lot is considered righteous, right? Which a lot of people kind of have a mind-blowing moment when Lot is considered a righteous person. John Corson writes this: "How can Lot be righteous? Yes, that is what Peter calls him in 2 Peter 2:7. Now, Peter is the rock of the church, right? How can Lot possibly be considered righteous? Because righteousness is imputed solely on the basis of simple faith. I am righteous, and so are you, if you have confessed with your mouth that Jesus is who he claimed to be, and believed in your heart that God raised him from the dead." Romans 10:9 and 10:10. I love this chapter because there's a lot of, this is John Corson as well. I love this chapter because there are a lot of people I deeply care about who, like Lot, made a profession of faith but ended up in Sodom, not living the way they know they should. If you're worried about a friend or a family member, take hope. While we don't want anyone to follow Lot's example, because sin brings all kinds of pain and problems presently, as well as empty-handedness internally, know this: if a son of yours confesses with his mouth that Jesus is who he claimed to be, and believes in his heart that God raised him from the dead, he will go up in the rapture, which is an account of this illustration. He goes on to say, I don't know how the Lord could have painted any more powerful a picture than this to say, I'm going to rescue people you might have thought were hopelessly lost. So again, if Lot is a righteous person, then there's hope for, sinners like myself and everybody else, right? Because Lot believed in God. Lot believed, as much as Lot struggled with a lot of things, Lot was a believer, and we'll most likely see Lot in heaven someday. So verse 24 and 25, so now we're going to see the Lord rain brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah and basically destroy it. Located near basically where the Dead Sea is. Sodom and Gomorrah used to be a beautiful area. It used to be green and lush, and now it's completely desert and arid, and the Dead Sea is the Dead Sea, right? Some people believe that Sodom and Gomorrah is under the Dead Sea, so who knows if we'll ever find that out. Going to verse 26 though, but his wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. So now at this point, Lot has basically negotiated with these angels. They told him to go to the mountains. Lot basically negotiates with these angels and convinces them to let him go to Zoar instead of to the mountains. So now they're headed to Zoar, which is basically a smaller satellite city of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not a good city. It's not a good place to be, but Lot decides that's where he wants to go instead of the mountains. So they're basically almost there, and then Lot's wife looks behind them and turns into a pillar of salt. Now, Jesus in Luke 17:32 says, remember Lot's wife, because Lot's wife is looking back at the past. She's looking back at her old life and reminiscing about her old life, instead of looking forward to what Jesus has done, right? In her, our walks aren't progressing with the Lord because we're looking back at the old things and the old times through these rose-colored glasses. I think back to Hebrews, where Paul in Hebrews is basically saying, a lot of the Jewish people who left to serve the Lord basically are looking back at the old Jewish customs and reminiscing and thinking about going back. And here Paul is saying, look forward, don't look back, look forward. Shifting to 27 through 30, and Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. So again, Abraham's up early in the morning, looking to the Lord. Abraham's an early riser, and he basically sees Sodom and Gomorrah basically burning down, and he basically understands what happened. But he also knows that God is saving Lot and his family. So now, at this point, Lot is basically in Zoar. So then Lot sees the city destroyed. So then Lot kind of looks at that and says, well, I'm in a city right now. They told me to go to the mountains. I should probably at this point heed the angel's advice and head to the mountains as opposed to being in this city because it's probably dangerous. So then Lot heads for the mountains. Now we're going to see Lot again many an issue and continue onward. So Lot gets to the mountains with his two daughters now because his wife turned into a pillar of salt. His other two daughters with his son-in-laws have been destroyed in Sodom, and now the two daughters make up this plan. So the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there's not a man in the earth to come to us after the manner of the earth. So David Guzik writes, evidently they decided the only thing to do in these circumstances except to trust God, which did not seem to occur to them. Obviously living in Sodom affected more than Lot. The effects were clearly seen in his daughters. So his daughters make this decision that because of the circumstances they're in, to continue their father's line, they're going to basically sleep with their father and have children to basically pass it on for Lot. And their plan, again, 1932 says, come, let us make our father drink wine. So they're going to get him drunk in order to carry out this plan. Now remember, at this point, Lot has lost his home city, all his belongings and everything. His two daughters and his son-in-laws were killed in the city of Sodom. His wife was turned to salt for looking back at Sodom. If you don't think Lot's in a bad mental state, in a bad place right now, I mean, he's in a bad place. And I think back to our society, right? What happens when people are in bad places in our society? They turn to drugs and alcohol. And I think this is exactly just an early, this correlates exactly today. People have this pressure, people have depression, all these things collide, and then people turn to drugs and alcohol, and basically this is what's happening a lot. He's basically trying to drink his problems and his heartache away. And we as Christians have the Lord, right? We don't need to drink our heartaches away. We can pray to the Lord and lean on the Lord to help us through these situations. And here, obviously, Lot isn't doing that. He's relying on alcohol. And what happens now is he's going to sleep with his two daughters. John Corson says, Lot's daughters didn't look to God to solve their problem. They simply came to their own immoral, irrational decisions. But whose fault was that? Certainly Lot must lay the blame squarely upon his own shoulders, for he led his daughters into Sodom and had educated them in the ways of Sodom. Now, I look to some of the education systems today and how we educate children, and I can see the correlation between how we educate our children and how basically Lot's daughters were raised in Sodom, right? You think about a city where people are looking to rape visitors. How would children grow up in that city? You think they're going to grow up with a good sense of morals, or you think they're going to grow up with a sense of like, hey, you just do whatever you need to do to survive? That's about it. Now Lot's daughters obviously sleep with him. They get pregnant. In verse 37 and 38, and the firstborn bare a son and called his name Moab, and he's the father of Moabites, and the younger bore a son, and his name was Ben-Ami, and he's the father of the children of Ammon. I'm going to pull up a quick slide here so you can see where basically the map is that shows the kingdom of Moab and the kingdom of Ammon. So they're going to be on the right side of Israel and Judah. Now McDonald writes, thus begins the Moabites and the Ammonites who become reoccurring thorns in Israel's side. It was Moabite women who later seduced the men of Israel to commit immorality in Numbers 25, 1-3, and the Ammonites who taught Israel the worship of Molech, including the sacrifice of children in 1 Kings 11:33. So obviously there's consequences to these actions, right? Now, coming from David Guzik, he writes, as you read through the Old Testament, you see the Moabites and the Ammonites hassling God's people continuously. And it all started with a believer drinking wine in a cave of depression because he didn't leave the city when he should have. May God give us wisdom. And I think that's a great way to end it. Is there's so much pressure in our society to lean on other things, drugs, alcohol, the government, things like that. When you're going through trials and tribulations, it should all be centered towards, you're leaning on should all be centered towards God, not towards these other things. And we see these things from Lot, right? And again, Lot's a righteous man, right? We'll most likely see Lot in heaven. But Lot made a lot of bad choices. First bad choice was Lot deciding he was going to live near Sodom because it was financially better for him and his family. So he made a decision not based off of what God told him to do, but basically off of finances. And then we just see Lot continuously inch closer to Sodom and become a part of Sodom. And then Sodom gets wiped out and Lot leaves Sodom. And he basically leaves with no morals and struggling with these things. But thank God that we have Abraham too, who stayed out of Sodom and basically leaned on the Lord, and he's our father of faith, basically. So we're going to end there. I don't see any questions, so we'll have a quick prayer. Lord Jesus, just thank you for this time, Lord. Thank you for this time that we can just go through the book of Genesis, Lord. Just thank you for this book, chapter 19, Lord. Your truthfulness with us, Lord, that you don't hide things from us. You give us the real story of Lot, the real story of Abraham, their mistakes, their sins, and just applicable to our lives because of our sins and things. We know that, Lord, you're gracious and you're merciful. Thank you for what you're doing, and just bless us this week. In your precious name, amen. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.